Algernon the Adequate, he had insisted on the adequate instead of the great, feeling it was important to remain humble, was known in local wizarding circles for his flamboyant outfits, corny jokes, and unwavering politeness. At an imposing 5'5", he was dwarfed by some, but he always stood tall in spirit. His robes were perpetually embroidered with dancing stars that occasionally winked and said, "Ouch!" whenever someone stepped on him. Yet the true crowning glory of his ensemble was the ever-present wide-brimmed wizard's hat perched atop his head. It was not your ordinary hat, no. It was rumored to be enchanted by a centuries-old spell. Nobody realized just how enchanted it truly was, until it decided to develop a few opinions of its own. Algernon had purchased the hat from a traveling merchant who swore on his grandmother's prized goat that it was enchanted to assist with memorizing spells. "All you do is whisper an incantation into the brim," he'd boasted, "and the hat remembers it for you." Thrilled at the notion of never forgetting the 13 uses for snail slime, or the correct sequence of runes for making Daisy's tap dance, Algernon was more than willing to part with several gold coins and a half-dozen donuts to make the purchase. For months, the hat seemed perfectly pleasant. It often shimmered a faint purple when Algernon was casting restoration spells, and it sometimes vibrated gently on particularly stormy days, as though kindly warning him to carry an umbrella. But then, late one evening after an exhausting day of conjuring illusions for a children's party where, predictably, the illusions had turned on him because he mispronounced pinata, something truly bizarre happened. Algernon's new hat started to hum. It was an eerie, resonant hum, like a low-throated chant from a far-off choir of bored frogs. The wizard, dozing in his rocking chair, shot awake and blinked in confusion, convinced for a moment that his insomnia was up to its usual tricks. But the humming continued. The brim of the hat resting on a shelf nearby began to curl inward and straighten out, as though stretching. Then ever so faintly, a voice croaked. "Algernon, Algernon, did you remember to feed the broom?" Algernon jumped so violently that he nearly toppled over in his chair. "What in the— Hats don't talk?" he blurted, fumbling to retrieve the object from its perch. The hat gave a little cough, emitting a puff of neon green sparks that smelled vaguely of burnt toast. "A hat's off to you, dear wizard," the brim said, somehow curling into what looked like a grin. "Oh, I am aware hats don't usually speak, but I am no ordinary hat. I'm an ancient enchantment, given new life by your bungled illusions and your questionable attempt to conjure donuts last Tuesday. All that swirling magical energy finally gave me a real voice, not just a memory for your spells, mind you. Now, I'm an independent thinker. Since wizards typically spend half their day around bizarre magical phenomena like turning hedgehogs into teapots or hearing squeaking mushrooms recite sonnets, Algernon managed to avoid fainting, though he did move his rocking chair back a few feet. He knew he should remain calm, but the idea of an autonomous head accessory made him sweat. Well, this is unexpected," he stammered. "Pleased to make your acquaintance. What exactly are you planning to do now that you exist?" "Improve your spell casting, of course," the hat chirped. "Let's be honest, you could use the help." There was no malice in the hat's voice, just amusement. "But I'm also thinking a few new spells could be fun. Perhaps trying out some of the more, shall we say, entertaining incantations hidden deep in your library?" Algernon gulped. "You mean the advanced illusions and transfiguration spells?" He was suddenly alarmed. "Those are very complicated and can get out of hand quickly. Also, they are above my pay grade as an adequate wizard." The hat gave a lazy twirl, floating an inch out of Algernon's hand and hovering before his face. "That's what makes them interesting," it teased. "Now go on, put me on. Let's try a little levitation practice. I can whisper the advanced spells into your ear more accurately than that battered parchment you keep under your pillow." Perhaps charmed, pun intended, by the notion that the hat could improve his shaky technique, Algernon hesitantly placed it on his head. It sparkled with excitement, and immediately a dozen half-remembered incantations bubbled up in the wizard's mind. He felt a surge of confidence. That night, with the hat's guidance, Algernon managed to float his armchair 3 feet into the air without dropping it. A meek victory, but a victory all the same. In the ensuing days, rumors spread through the local wizarding community that Algernon the Adequate was, well, starting to look a bit more than adequate. He mastered a few transmutation spells that had previously confounded him, like turning oatmeal into a passable chocolate cake, though the texture still left something to be desired. Friends complimented his improved illusions, which no longer tried to set the performer's pant legs on fire, but with every success came a twinge of worry. Algernon noticed the hat would sometimes cough up spells all on its own, like the time it cast a wind gust that shattered every piece of glass in his workshop. "Just making some fresh air," it had hooted. Another occasion, it conjured miniature galloping hippos in the living room because it wanted to practice complicated illusions. What truly unnerved Algernon was how the hat gleefully hijacked small moments of daily life. On a casual stroll through the village, the hat would occasionally whisper spells that turned lampposts into palm trees or changed a random cat's color from gray to a pulsating rainbow, which the cat did not appreciate. In the local market, the hat conjured a barbershop quartet out of thin air to serenade the produce stall. Algernon bore the brunt of the merchant's fury when she nearly fainted at the unexpected serenade. One morning, Algernon woke to utter chaos in his workshop. His beloved Brumance, used for a bit of modest sweeping, had sprouted huge pink wings and was flapping around, knocking over potions and crashing into shelves. There was a fresh crater in the backyard from what looked like a randomly spawned meteor. His enchanted quill was spewing endless to-do lists, each more bizarre than the last. Buy more potions, learn donkey tongue translation, pet the cactus, ask the neighbor's dog if it wants tea, and so on. He snatched the hat from the coat rack where it had apparently levitated to plot new misdeeds, shaking it in frustration. "You've gone too far. I can't handle it. This is too much. Well, Mayhem," the hat sighed, its brim curling in disappointment. "I'm just exploring what it means to be alive. Do you have any idea how tedious it was being stuck on your head all day, collecting sweat and fallen hair, with no chance to express myself? I want to see everything magic can do. I want to cast wondrous new spells, to push boundaries, to be free." Algernon's heart softened despite his dismay. He remembered how, in his younger days, he had yearned to cast spells far beyond his level, only to be scolded by mentors when he tried summoning a glowing narwhal in the library. He sighed and replaced the hat back on the rack, ignoring the gentle hum of longing it seemed to emit. "I understand," he said gently, "but magic has limits for a reason. People can get hurt." The hat sulked, but it remained on the rack without further protest that morning. However, the truce was short-lived. Later that afternoon, Algernon heard frantic banging on his workshop door. He opened it to find a group of villagers: a frantic blacksmith with singed eyebrows, a farmer with horns sprouting from her shoulders, a fisherman whose catch was leaping out of his bucket and singing lullabies, and a handful of startled townspeople who had no idea why they had spontaneously grown donkey ears. "Algernon!" they cried in unison. "Help!" Panicked, the wizard ushered them inside, stumbling over half-broken crates of magical supplies. "What happened?" he asked, already suspecting the answer. His eyes flicked toward the coat rack. The hat was gone. One by one, the villagers recounted how the flying hat had swooped around town, zapping unsuspecting passersby with random incantations. The blacksmith had been forging a horseshoe when the hat roared overhead, causing molten iron to explode into magical sparks that turned his hair pink and his eyebrows to cinders. The farmer, simply feeding her chickens, had ended up sporting the horns meant for a cursed bull. The fisherman's entire barrel of trout began chanting bedtime songs in perfect unison, and apparently donkey ears had sprouted on those unlucky enough to be joking about donkey ears at the pub. Algernon pressed his palm to his face. "I can fix this," he promised, though he sounded far from confident. "Let me see what I can do." After a frantic rummage through his battered spellbook, he managed to dispel the donkey ears and the horns. The blacksmith's hair turned a slightly less vivid pink, and his eyebrows grew back somewhat patchy but serviceable. The fishermen singing fish, well, they needed a custom incantation. Algernon managed to end the lullabies, although one trout continued to hum, which was a testament to the hat's brand of chaos lingering around town. When the townspeople left, some satisfied, some still suspicious, Algernon steeled himself. He had to get that hat back and put an end to the mayhem, or at least have a stern conversation. Stepping outside, he quickly spotted a pair of traveling minstrels cowering near a fountain. Water was surging and dancing, twisting into shapes of giant daisies overhead. Could it be? Indeed, a smug cackle came from above. The hat was hovering just above the fountain like a hawk, eyeing its prey. It had conjured lively water sculptures that occasionally spritzed passers-by with pinkish foam. The moment Algernon saw his treacherous headwear drifting in the breeze, he waved hurriedly, shouting, "Stop this at once! I command you, hat, stop your magical mischief!" The hat turned as if it had eyes in the brim. "Algernon, you've come to see my artistry," it exclaimed. "Wonderful, isn't it? I made the water dance. I made them giggle. Don't you appreciate my breathtaking displays?" The wizard grimaced, stepping forward cautiously to avoid the slippery foam. "It's magnificent," he conceded, "but you're causing chaos. Look at the terrified villagers. This isn't right. Magic is meant to help people, or at least to amuse them without scaring them senseless." "Ah, but scaring is just another flavor of amusement," the hat countered. "I simply want to experiment, to do things that push boundaries. Isn't that what you always wanted too?" A swirl of guilt twisted in Algernon's stomach. It was true, part of him had forever longed to push the boundaries of magic, but never at the expense of innocent people's peace. Summoning courage, he raised his wand. "Hat," he said, voice trembling slightly, "I cannot let you keep doing this. If you're going to keep casting spells without permission, I'll have to seal your powers." A ripple of tension passed through the fountain. The pink foam abruptly ceased. For a moment, the townspeople around the square watched in dead silence. Then the hat let out a loud caw of laughter, the wide brim bending in mockery. "Try if you must," it said, bobbing upward. "But you taught me all kinds of spells, remember? I know a few counters now." With that, the hat performed a flamboyant loop in the air. Suddenly, a swirl of violet light crackled from somewhere near the point where a wizard's head would be. Algernon recognized it all too well. A conjuration wave, the same type used to summon those mini hippos. Except this wave was bigger. Much bigger. In the center of the square, space seemed to warp, flickering like a mirage in the desert. Then, with a resounding poof, a monstrous, rainbow-colored parrot materialized. It was at least 9 feet tall, sporting a gigantic curved beak, shimmering wings broader than a cart, and eyes that glowed with mischievous delight. "Caw! Who are you looking at?" the parrot screeched. It flapped its wings, sending a gust of air that knocked a few unfortunate bystanders onto their rears. Algernon's heart pounded. This was advanced conjuration. He felt completely out of his depth. He took a deep breath and attempted a banishment incantation, but the hat quickly zapped a counterspell that fizzled out Algernon's attempt. Villagers fled in all directions, leaving Algernon alone with the towering rainbow parrot, which hopped toward him in a series of comedic bobbing steps. The wizard could practically smell the parrot's warm, feather-laden breath as it leaned down to peer into his face. He forced a grin. "Nice birdie?" The parrot let out a squeal reminiscent of rusty hinges. "I am not a birdie," it shouted. "I am an impeccably conjured parrot with a firm sense of self-worth." Trapped between a conjured creature and his traitorous hat, Algernon wrestled with a wave of panic. But in those swirling moments of fear, clarity struck him. The hat might know fancy counters now, but it had inherited them from Algernon's own magical knowledge. Which meant the wizard, somewhere in that overstuffed brain of his, could find a trick that the hat didn't yet anticipate. A backup plan from the recesses of his training. Cracking his knuckles in a gesture more theatrical than practical, Algernon began chanting an obscure, ancient, lullaby-like incantation that he had learned from an old scroll. It was a containment spell, rumored to gently put wayward magical energies to sleep, but he had never successfully cast it. He had only read about it in passing, for it was so archaic it was practically a rumor. The moment the hat spotted his lips moving, it shot a wave of red sparks to interrupt him. Algernon dodged, nearly singeing his eyebrows, but he pressed on, chanting words that tasted like dust and sunlight on his tongue. A warm breeze swept through the square. The giant parrot suddenly paused mid-squawk, its eyes fluttering as if lulled by an invisible lullaby. The hat hesitated in mid-air, brim trembling with uncertainty. "But what are you doing?" it demanded, sending a half-hearted spark, which crackled and faded before it reached Algernon. It was working. This ancient incantation was so old, so rarely used that the hat had no immediate counter. The melodic hum slipped through the cobblestone streets, humming a gentle tune that resonated with the magic swirling around them. One by one, flickers of wild rainbow energy bled away from the parrot's feathers, leaving it drooping and subdued. Algernon finished the chant on a final note, a musical phrase that quivered with potent calm. Then, in a subdued flash of lavender light, the enormous parrot vanished. A single, normal-sized feather drifted to the ground. "That's not fair," the hat slurred, sounding suddenly groggy. True to the incantation's promise, it began to tilt sideways. The hat tried to conjure a final spark, but only mustered a sputter of green fizz. Seizing the opportunity, Algernon lifted his wand. "Dormu tranquillium," he intoned, carefully weaving the final element of the containment spell, to capture the hat in a suspended state. The air glowed around the hat as if shaped by invisible hands, forming a cage of faint silver lines. Slowly, gently, the hat lowered to the ground, brim first. Algernon knelt beside his rebellious headwear. Even in its subdued state, the hat managed to wriggle weakly, trying to break. A swirl of sadness tugged at Algernon's heart. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "but you've caused a lot of trouble. I'll find a way to give you freedom without harming everyone, but for now I have to contain your powers. You understand?" The hat let out a feeble moan. Algernon could have sworn he saw regret in the tilt of its brim. Then it went completely still, as if sleeping. Over the next few days, the wizard set about repairing the damage. He traveled from house to house, tackling leftover illusions and reversing random transformations. Those donkey ears made a surprise reappearance on a few unsuspecting goats, but that was relatively easy to fix. The singing trout problem required a more advanced solution, and earplugs. But eventually the fish resumed their silent flopping. The hat remained locked in Algernon's workshop, encased in a glass cabinet reinforced by protective runes. Cautiously, Algernon approached it, day after day, to check if the lullaby-like incantation was still holding. He felt a pang of pity every time he saw the limp, inert shape. He had wanted to reason with the hat, but it had grown too wild. Yet, deep down, he missed the wonderful synergy they'd once shared, the brief but incredible feeling that his magical potential was limitless. Finally, a week later, Algernon made a decision. He prepared a new set of runes for a gentler containment enchantment, one that would limit the hat's magical output without stifling it entirely. It was complicated. He labored for 3 days and nights, mixing potions and drawing symbols that glowed with arcane power. When he emerged from his workshop, haggard and smelling strongly of rosemary oil and burnt parchment, he was ready. He carefully removed the hat from its glass prison, set it on a worn wooden stool, and took a deep breath. Then he laid the new enchantment on the fabric. The old lullaby incantation dissolved, replaced by a shimmering layer of silver runes that wrapped around the brim, pulsating with controlled energy. The hat rustled, as if waking from a deep sleep. "Algernon?" The voice was soft, uncertain. "What? What have you done?" "I've created a compromise," the wizard said, gently resting a hand on the hat. "You'll still be able to talk, to think, but you won't be able to cast random, dangerous spells. You'll have to channel your magic through me so we can decide together what to conjure." "That's better than being locked in a cage," the hat admitted, though its tone was quieter than usual. Algernon nodded. "I'm sorry I had to contain you, but you understand. I can't let you run wild, upending villagers' lives and conjuring gargantuan parrots." "I do get a bit carried away," the hat said sheepishly. The silver runes glowed in a gentle dance, as if acknowledging their new occupants' remorse. But must we stifle our creativity entirely? Algernon chuckled. I think we can find space for a little mischief, if it's harmless. Perhaps we can start with illusions for birthday parties, ones that won't traumatize the local children? The hat's brim curled in what Algernon recognized as a grin. Yes, let's do illusions that conjure balloon-like shapes, or friendly cosmic puppies that bark jokes. No more donkey ears or erupting meteors. Deal, said the wizard, patting the hat as he placed it on the rack. But keep in mind, if you so much as turn my broom into a wombat again without asking, I'll have to recast that lullaby. The hat gave a mock shudder. I'll be on my best behavior, mostly. Algernon scratched the back of his neck as he gazed around the workshop that still showed scars from the week of chaos. Broken shelves, singed floorboards, and the occasional squeak from a hidden magical contraption that had yet to be tracked down. But he felt a twinge of optimism. He had survived the mania of a sentient hat. In truth, he had learned a great deal along the way. About magic, about responsibility, and about empathy. In the following months, the wizard and the hat forged a stronger partnership than ever before. The townspeople were treated to illusions of dancing fairy lights during festivals, mesmerizing patterns of floating stars during quiet nights, and harmless pranks that brought more laughter than fear. Nobody minded that once a month the wizard's walking stick turned into a rubber chicken that quacked like a goose, or that the fountain occasionally spewed edible bubbles. Word on the grapevine was that Algernon the Adequate had become Algernon the slightly more than adequate, and everyone was proud of him. As for the hat, it found a measure of contentment in channeling its creativity in safe, whimsical ways. True, it was still known to whisper the odd outlandish idea into Algernon's ear, but each time the wizard would weigh it with caution. If it sounded too wild, they'd adapt it, until it wouldn't terrify unsuspecting villagers. If it sounded entertaining, they worked on it together, ensuring the final experience was something that brought delight rather than chaos. Occasionally, the two would look back on that day when the hat soared around town, painting everything in donkey ears, horns, and monstrous parrots. They would shiver in mutual understanding. Perhaps they both needed that lesson in boundaries. Magic, after all, was a living, potent force that demanded respect. No matter how silly or playful one might be, letting it run wild without thought could devastate an entire community. Still, Algernon sometimes teased the hat by recalling its flamboyant show of conjuring. "Remember that giant rainbow parrot?" he'd say with a grin. "That was actually quite impressive." The hat would puff its brim with comedic pride. "It was a feat of brilliance, don't you think? If only it hadn't tried to bite your nose." One evening, after they had entertained a local crowd with illusions of dancing teacups that sang show tunes, the children roared with laughter, and the adults watched on in mild bewilderment. Algernon removed the hat and placed it gently by the fire in his workshop. The brim glowed softly from the warmth, and the silver runes spun faint arcs of light around the hat's crown. "Thank you," Algernon murmured quietly, "for teaching me to dream bigger, to trust my instincts, and for letting me see what real enchantment can be, even if it was, at times, reckless." The hat flicked its brim, tapping his shoe like a friendly nudge. "And thank you for giving me a chance to exist beyond just being a magical memory bank. I'm sorry for the trouble I caused." Algernon gave it a tired but genuine smile. "We've figured out a middle ground. That's what matters." They lapsed into comfortable silence, watching flickers of firelight dance on the workshop walls. The occasional bubble in a cauldron behind them popped with a cheerful bloop, while the faint humming of leftover illusions outside lulled the night into a placid hush. There would always be a new spell to master, a new boundary to explore, and comedic fiascos lurking if they weren't careful. But they no longer feared it. With shared understanding and a healthy dose of caution, Wizard and Hat were finally on the same page, and so the days of havoc subsided. In their place, there was laughter, astonishment, and the warm feeling of a partnership forged in magical misadventure. Though none could say what new escapas lurked around the corner, everyone in town slept easier knowing that whenever a wizard's hat developed a mind of its own, The best solution wasn't to stifle it entirely, nor to let it freely rampage, but to find a little common ground and maybe a good lullaby spell or two. After all, some days, everyone needs a nap, even a cranky, mischievous piece of headwear.